Conservation biology aims to preserve biodiversity by integrating ecology, physiology, molecular biology, genetics, and evolutionary biology. Biodiversity has three main components. Genetic diversity comprises genetic variation within a population and between populations. Species diversity is the variety of species in an ecosystem or throughout the biosphere. An endangered species is in danger of becoming extinct throughout all or in a significant portion of its range. A threatened species is likely to become endangered in the foreseeable future. Ecosystem diversity refers to a variety of ecosystems in the biosphere. Biodiversity is deeply connected to human welfare. The term biophilia describes humans' innate sense of connection to nature and all life. Ecosystem services encompass all the processes through which natural ecosystems and their species help sustain human life, including purification of air and water, detoxification, decomposition of waste, cycling of nutrients, and moderation of weather. Most species loss can be traced to four major threats. Human destruction of habitat is the greatest threat to biodiversity throughout the biosphere. Introduced species are those that humans move from native locations to new geographic regions. Without their native predators, parasites, and pathogens, introduced species may spread rapidly. Overexploitation is human harvesting of wild plants or animals at rates exceeding the ability of populations of those species to rebound. For example, the fishing industry has greatly reduced populations of bluefin tuna to levels that cannot sustain further exploitation. Global change includes alterations in climate, atmospheric chemistry, and broad ecological systems that reduce the capacity of Earth to sustain life. The burning of fossil fuels releases oxides of sulfur and nitrogen that react with water in air, forming sulfuric and nitric acids, leading to acid precipitation with a pH of less than 5.2, eventually harming some aquatic and terrestrial organisms. Human activities also contribute to the rapid rise of atmospheric carbon dioxide concentration and other greenhouse gases, eroding the ozone layer, which normally reduces the penetration of UV radiation through the atmosphere. The depletion of ozone layer leads to global warming. An ecosystem can be disturbed when nutrient level exceeds the critical load. The amount of added nutrient, usually nitrogen or phosphorus, that can be absorbed by plants without damaging ecosystem integrity. For example, nitrogenous minerals in the soil that exceed the critical load eventually leach into groundwater or run off into freshwater and marine ecosystems, contaminating water supplies and killing fish. An ecosystem can also be disturbed by the phenomenon of biological magnification, in which toxic compounds that humans release become more concentrated in successive trophic levels of a food web. Therefore, top-level carnivores tend to be more severely affected by toxic compounds in the environment. For example, the biological magnification of the insecticide DDT in the tissues of birds has declined their reproduction rates. Biologists focusing on conservation at the population and species levels follow two main approaches. The small population approach studies processes that can make small populations become extinct. A small population is prone to positive feedback loops of inbreeding and genetic drift, leading to the loss of genetic variability that draw it down an extinction vortex. The minimum viable population, or MVP, is the minimum population size at which a species can survive. A meaningful estimate of MVP requires determining the effective population size, abbreviated as NE, which is calculated by the formula NE equals 4 times NF times NM over NF plus NM, where NF represents the number of females that successfully bred, and NM represents the number of males that successfully bred. Wherever possible, conservation programs attempt to sustain total population sizes that include at least the minimum viable number of reproductively active individuals. On the other hand, the declining population approach focuses on the threatened and endangered population that show a downward trend regardless of population size. It emphasizes the environmental factors that cause a population to decline. The declining population approach includes the following steps. Confirm using the population data that the species was more widely distributed or more abundant in the past compared to its current population level. Study the natural history of this species and related species, including reviewing the research literature to determine the species' environmental needs. Develop hypotheses for all possible causes of the decline, including human activities and natural events, and list the prediction of each hypothesis. Because many factors may be correlated with the decline, test the most likely hypothesis first. For example, remove the suspected cause of decline to see if the experimental population rebounds compared to a control population. Apply the results of the diagnosis to manage the threatened species and monitor its recovery. Ecosystem management seeks to make biodiversity conservation part of land use planning. A movement corridor is a narrow strip of quality habitat connecting otherwise isolated patches. Movement corridors promote dispersal and help sustain populations. In areas of heavy human use, artificial corridors are sometimes constructed. A biodiversity hotspot is a relatively small area with a great concentration of endemic species and many endangered and threatened species. Biodiversity hotspots are good choices for nature reserves, but identifying them is not always easy. The zone reserve model recognizes that conservation often involves working in landscapes that are largely human-dominated. A zone reserve includes relatively undisturbed areas and the modified areas that surround them and that serve as buffer zones. Costa Rica has become a world leader in establishing zone reserves. Restoration ecology seeks to initiate or speed up the recovery of degraded ecosystems. It is based on two key strategies. Bioremediation is the use of living organisms to detoxify ecosystems. The organisms most often used are prokaryotes, fungi, and plants. These organisms can take up and sometimes metabolize toxic molecules. Biological augmentation uses organisms to add essential materials to a degraded ecosystem. For example, nitrogen-fixing plants can increase the available nitrogen in soil.